Big Priest, of course, able to stack a bunch of threats, but honestly, Control Warlocks are running so much removal these days that if they parcel them out correctly and get the early cooldown, sometimes they just get there.
Yeah, we saw that even in the very last series, right? Like, I think each one of us has said at some point during this tournament that you can't just remove everything a Spiteful Priest plays, for example. Well, we kind of saw Control Warlock do exactly that, right? Until it came down to N'Zoth and a few hero powers from Gul'dan to finish the job. But yeah, the Control Warlock will definitely be a big problem for even this deck that we're going to see. The Hunter, normally Hunter against controlling Warlocks used to be very much in favor of the Hunters back in the day. Just too much early damage and then finish the game out with hero powers. Can't do that anymore against a Control Warlock. There's too much healing, too much stability. But this matchup is one that we talked about briefly as well. And we're thinking that maybe like Spellstone is probably one of the key cards in this matchup, just to try and really ramp up some early pressure if you can get the secrets.
Right, if you don't hit the Barns on 4, then the only other way to try and pressure the Rogue out is to get a buffed up Spellstone, and ProfessorOak has at least some of the tools to get there. Odyssey looking like a decent hand with, you know, bounce effects and draw effects. So he just has to be careful to not, you know, oh my goodness, ProfessorOak, the Barnes gamer.
I made the joke earlier. I'm going to repeat it. ProfessorOak's Pokedex entry on 4 is not Charmander, it is Barnes. That's where it is. He hits it every single time. It's incredible. And this hand is now perfect, because we were debating, would you rather have like the Barnes Yasharaj start, at which point like Glacial Shard becomes something that can shut you down quite quickly, or would you rather have the secret into Spellstone start, which is then maybe a little bit vulnerable to Vanish? Those are like the counterplay options. Well, why not both?
Yeah, have your cake and eat it. And on top of that, I feel like the cat trick is one of the best secrets he could have, because Odyssey feels inclined to get his bounce effect / any minion that he wants to bounce, like these Fireflies, off the Igneous online as soon as possible, so he doesn't respect the cat trick. And that just means ProfessorOak is getting the damage in as soon as possible, even winning the Huffer roll, because Huffer is always a win.
Very true.
So he's got all he needs, ProfessorOak that is, to continue on the pressure. And we were saying that if you get Barnes and Yasharaj, one of the ways that the Quest Rogue can stifle that is to bounce Glacial Shard. But it seems like the bounce effects won't be enough to deal with everything that'll be coming on in the next 2 turns.
Yeah, the problem from here, because ProfessorOak had such an aggressive start, is he only has to connect like one or two more attacks with minions. And then the hero power race plus the Unleash the Hounds is just going to end the game, right? And now he's just drawn a kill command on top of all of that. So
I honestly can't think of a better hand than ProfessorOak could have drawn. But anyway.
I wonder if he will Candle Shot this Glacial Shard, though, before he chooses to go with the Barnes. Yeah, I actually like this line. We talked about this right at the start. You brought it up just again, and then Barnes coming down, and then that Glacial Shard gets bounced. That is a way ProfessorOak can lose this game from a very promising-looking position. So I love this diversion, showing that he is not just a Barnes gamer. He knows when to get off that line, actually make the smart play. Really, really respect this line of thinking from ProfessorOak.
Yeah, it's quite a deadly combination, right? When you draw the Barnes and you know when to hold back on it, which is not very often. This is maybe a 1 in 100 situations. It's not like holding back. The Barnes makes his win condition any different. I mean, denying the Glacial Shard, which is a prime bounce target if he played the Barnes, makes a lot of sense. So now Odyssey still on the ropes, already at 19.
So many options.
And no convenient way to complete the quest quite yet.
Yeah, he's just going to have to go off on these Flame Elementals from this point. That is 1 and 2 that have been played. That's 3 in the hand now. Then the Shadow Step is 4. The Brewmaster is 5. So he does have his completion. It is just a little bit slow from this point. And now with the Glacial Shard, Glacial Shard dealt with, ProfessorOak is willing to pull the trigger and get his 10-10 in play and pretty much threaten lethal every turn from here until the end of the game now.
Right, and just getting rid of the other Flame Elemental, because it is the quest that Odyssey's shown intention to complete the quest with, the minion rather, and I expect that the Wolves will just go face here because it's leaving the Zola on the board.
Right.
That is not very consequential.
Yeah, with if you know there's a Flame Elemental in hand, previously there wouldn't, like against old Quest Rogue, there wouldn't have been much reason to trade there, unless you were fearful of them actually prepping out the quest itself on the following turn. But now Sonya is a card that you have to consider, right? So leaving that 1-1 in play would have allowed a faster quest completion if Sonya Shadow Dancer was in hand for Odyssey.
Sonya really brought new life into Quest Rogue.
Right.
I think it made it as viable as it is right now. All right, and Professor Oak honestly just drew the nuts, and that's, you know, the nature of Barnes as a card. But again, we did talk about how holding back on it one turn showed some very, very good understanding of the matchup, and it's a Barnes draw that I would say is deserved in some if there's justice in Hearthstone.
Which is a topic in and of itself. But Odyssey ripped his Mimic Pod. He had to go fishing for Glacial Shard number 2. That was his only way to prevent taking 10 from that Yashiraj. Maybe some kind of weird Wax Elemental play could have stabilized at some point for him as well. But I think he knows at this point if he takes 10 from that thing, even if he doesn't die immediately, then the game is over. But he still has no way of just preventing this onboard lethal, more or less.
Right, onboard lethal in hand, plus weapon, plus hero power. It's way too much, and Odyssey just gonna call it quits. Game 1, going to Professor Oak.
And that has been the story so far. I mean, the games that he has won have been, for the most part, real cruises for him. His lineup has kind of done the work for him. A lot of his work was done in prep, and he got to this point. He just has that one long, arduous loss to Jack Attack on his record that I'm sure he's looking to avenge. But the opening win with that Spell Hunter puts him right on the board, and there is plenty more barns where that came from for Professor Oak.
Oh, yeah. And it is, again, on that Quest Rogue that we keep questioning, can Odyssey pull out the win with that? Because not only is it a deck that has very specific matchups that it wants to line up against, it's a deck that requires a really high skill level to be able to pilot to a point where it's viable in tournament.
Yeah, I think, you know, when you come up against the really, really slow decks, there is a lot of margin for error with Quest Rogue. I think you can play the deck, you know, with the very mediocre level of mastery and still beat up on a lot of control decks if you're bringing it as like a target strategy and part of that. It's when you run into those decks that are going to develop board quickly and start beating you up, that's when you really need to understand exactly how to optimize your quest completions. Get them out there one turn earlier than a bad player would have done. Understand when to play defensively with your Glacial Shards and your Wax Elementals. All these kind of things start to come into play. And it remains to be seen from Odyssey, because there's definitely been some heated debate backstage about some of the lines that he's taken, which, you know, some people were agreeing with the plays he was making. I will put that out there. It's not like we were all just back there making fun of the guy. No. But he's definitely caused some debates in the player area backstage. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and debate is one of the funnest parts about being part of the Hearthstone community. It would not be very interactive if everything we saw is just correct. And it says something about the meta that a lot of people still have differing opinions on how to best pilot a deck. I think it makes for some pretty interesting tournaments.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the things that, you know, I always want to bring up when people say, well, you know, why don't you guys call out mistakes more often? Why don't you just call things wrong all the time? It's like, well, if you take 10 of the best players in the world, put them in a room together and get them to watch a game of Hearthstone, they're going to disagree with each other about 75% of the time on each turn, right? So if the 10 best players in the world can't agree what the best play is, how do rank 25 casters supposed to call anything wrong with any definitive?
I'm rank 24, excuse me.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Gina, to do you that disservice. I apologize.
All right, so now it's going to be the Big Priest, another Barnes deck going up against the Quest Rogue on the second try for Odyssey. And with the Big Priest relying a bit more on Barnes and 4 and not kind of having that alternative game plan of Spellstone that the Hunter might have had, it might be a bit more difficult to get the W. Then again, if it goes on longer, having a lot of taunts in play can stifle the Quest Rogue pressure, but that is a 3-of-a-kind Southsea deck hand plus 2 bounces in hand for Odyssey.
Right. If you don't Mimic Pod an actual bounce effect itself, Mimic Podding a minion that you just already have in hand is the next best thing, you would say. Using the Ferryman here instead of the Brewmaster, just
and he's
because
got
of being universal.
prep as well, so it's going to be Quest Online very soon.
Yeah, this is looking like almost a freebie at this point for Odyssey.
And Professor Oak missing the 4th entry on his Pokédex for this game. Maybe Trainer Red already picked up the Barnes instead of the Charmander. Yeah, makes it really, really difficult because he'd love to have something to play for these Eternal Servitudes to get a target. But yeah, I guess he's just going to have to find a way to deal with the rogue pressure so that he has time to Psychic Scream. But Odyssey should know that Psychic Scream is one of the ways he can lose if, yes, you get the quest online, but you overextend into Dragonfire, Psychic Scream, or Pint-Sized Horror. So it's all about, once you complete the quest, being able to parcel out your minions so that they're not too innocuous, that the priest doesn't have to expend resources, but so that they're threatening enough that you can bait out the big board clears inefficiently from the priest.
Firefly coming down here. Will he commit the Flame Elemental as well? He does have to, of course, consider Shadow Word Horror, and Quest Rogue's a very different deck than usual, because I love the point you were just making of, making sure you have enough in reserve as the Shadow Essence is picked up, by the way, so Professor Oak does have a chance to go off. But normally, with most decks, when you're considering rationing your threats, a 1-2 Flame Elemental wouldn't be a huge factor, right? You say, oh, I'm just going to play it, it's not a big deal. If it gets AoE'd, it's AoE'd. Well, that's a 5-5 later in the game, right? So playing it into a Shadow Word Horror now is something that can be very damaging to you later on.
Right, and it's absolutely crucial. I was going to say, because Odyssey doesn't have any card draw left in his hand, but the top deck of the Cold Light Oracle definitely gives him the steam to keep going after the quest completion and surviving throughout past 1 or 2 more AoEs. Of course, we see that Professor Oak, after this initial force of Yasharaj and the Obsidian statue, is still 1 turn off playing the Psychic Scream, so the game could actually be over real quick if he can pick up some charges.
He does have 2 more statues from those Eternal Servitudes in hand, though, so he has a lot of stalling power, at least. But if you ever wondered how many Obsidian statues you need to stop Quest Rogue being able to kill you, we might be about to find out in the coming turns. This is a very nice stabilization turn,
right,
though,
yeah, I didn't spot that. Of course, the minions would be trading and making them more vulnerable to the Embrace Circle. I'm so used to saying Akanai Circle, but alright. So it's Odyssey.
Oh my god, that Vanish draw is insane!
Yeah, I have no word. Oh.
He's going to prep the Vanish, right?
Has to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have no more good prep targets, first of all, and you don't want to be taking 20 to face when you can, save your own face and reset the board in your favor, make the Yasharajas unplayable, and essentially win the game.
It was just such a crazy sequence of events, and it all just happened so fast as well, as these players are playing so quickly. Like, Professor Oak recognized that he had the ball clear available to him. That then allowed him to be super greedy with his res, so he could res the Yasharaj instead of the Obsidian statue. He didn't have to be defensive. He got rewarded for that by Yasharaj hitting second Yasharaj, which would have been game over, aside from the fact that Odyssey just ripped the Vanish off the top in the answer and just put 20 mana's worth of stuff back in Professor Oak's hand.
Yeah, it was between Vanish or a Glacial Shard play to save Odyssey from the double Yasharaj out of nowhere.
I mean, even if he'd have just sharded it, though, Professor Oak just, ends his next turn even, and then suddenly the Yasharajas are pulling more Obsidian statues and an Acera and whatever else, so that Vanish was super crucial.
Yeah, absolutely clutch, and now Professor Oak, not quite sure what he's digging for with the Shadow Visions. I think the turn is gonna be Servitude, but I guess Hero Power is not impactful enough, so he's just going for that other combo piece for the Pint-Sized Horror.
Yeah, I think Horror was specifically what he was looking for at that point, since he did have the pint size.
So the steam keeps on going for Odyssey. That is quite a lot of charges.
Odyssey just gonna plow through his deck here, though, with the Cold Light Oracle. Burns another clearing potential with the Embrace the Shadows, and a Spellstone goes down, which is, another Obsidian statue, essentially, at this point. Another roadblock that he can put in the way is now gone with that Spellstone being burned.
Right, so Professor Oak has to, well, he can trade and essentially clear 2 minions like this, go back up to 26, which is a nice health total. And Lich King can be played down. It is very scary, though, even at 26, with that many cards in hand from Odyssey, and even a taunt on board. I wouldn't say he's too scared of dying straight up, but maybe over 2 turns. However, he doesn't really have a good way of putting the pressure back on Odyssey's side, because if he just spends the turns dealing with the board over and over again, assuming that Odyssey doesn't overextend, Odyssey will just keep having the resources. He has Engineer to keep going, and eventually Professor Oak needs to have his own game plan of being the aggressor.
And this is where Big Priest like seems so ugly. Like on a surface level, like a casual Hearthstone player would look at this hand and be like, okay, 8, 9, 10, sure. Like I see my curve here. But it's recognizing that in situations like this, like just playing one big idiot each turn just isn't going to get the job done, you know? And you've got to find those combo plays that are going to carry you through. And that's where the real difficulty in playing this deck comes into it.
Right, so Odyssey has 4 chargers and 1 bounce in hand. So that's essentially 25 damage, 30 with the Brewmaster, but 8 of it has to run into the Lich King. Not quite lethal, but I think the problem stands that as long as Odyssey plays... Alright, actually he could play 5/5s, and then Professor Oak has the turn to go for the Pint-Sized Horror play. And assuming the Lich King survives, he can deal 8 damage to FaZe. It's not going to work out that way, though. The refill is just insane.
It's so good, yeah. Odyssey sequencing everything correctly here, making sure he uses the deck hands instead of the boars while he has a weapon up, because the boars are universal. Maintains the Brewmaster on board because the deck hands are the things that he wants to repeat from the Sonya. Very small little things, because although all of your minions are essentially identical in Quest Rogue, they're all very, very different in their own little ways. So making sure you use the right minion for the right job is super important.
So going for Pint-Sized Horror here allows him to fit in not a minion, but a hero power. So then again, you know, playing Psychic Scream is really just going in circles at this point, because your opponent will eventually draw into these minions again, and then now you don't have a Psychic Scream. You're not really developing your own game plan. And if you give him back a Cold Light Oracle, he'll eventually just mill you.
Right.
There's still Engineers in the deck for Odyssey, so he's at really no risk of running out of refill. I'm really not seeing how Professor Oak can get out of this one.
He also has to be just like generally terrified of how much damage can come from hand, because he knows the deck hands are recycled in hand. He knows how many, like exactly what the hand size is. He hasn't seen Stone Toss Balls just yet, so yeah, it's really easy for him to die from this position even.
So the hero power from 21 to 23 is actually a really relevant damage increment, because yeah, it's multiples of 5 plus 1 because of the dagger. So Odyssey not quite. Oh yeah, with
he
the
picked
picks
up the
of
Shadow
Step.
Step off the Mimic. Yeah, that'll do it.
Goes for it right away, and the, I would say, astounding draw from the Quest Rogue at the beginning, with not even needing Sonya to complete the quest, really carried him through.
Yeah, super strong. Oak start was just a little bit slow, but it was that rapid fire sequence of events around turn 6, 7 that really set everything off. The clear into the double Yashiraj, and then it was that top deck vanish from Odyssey that really changed the course of the game. If it wasn't for that, Professor Oak could very easily be looking at a 2-0 lead here. Instead, the series essentially resets 1-1 with both players winning with a deck that you'd probably expect to pick up a win somewhere along the line.
Sure, and that means that Odyssey is still left with Secret Mage and his Spiteful Priest. And Spiteful Priest, we've seen it steamroll so many games so far, and yeah, just really wonder if Professor Oak can get back his Barnes mojo.
Yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen at this point, but that Big Priest is definitely capable of doing the work when it doesn't get the Barnes. I mean, you saw that there. Barnes was burned very, very late in the game, didn't have an impact on the game whatsoever, and still it was, you know, one top deck away from destroying an extremely good Quest Rogue start there. So it can definitely get the job done, and there's plenty more life in this series yet, even outside of that Big Priest, but it's very much been the story of Professor Oak's run through here, his decision to bring those 2 Barnes decks to the tournament and rely on some of those real power spike turns. But we'll see if he sticks on that Big Priest or whether he switches over to the Warlock to go up against the remaining Spiteful Summoner Priest and the Secret Mage that Odyssey has available.
Right, and I want to talk about just today in terms of the number of games played. Professor Oak, I think, had one match at the beginning, and then he was just chilling for a very long time, whereas Odyssey has been on stream and playing games throughout the day. Probably playing a deck like Quest Rogue as well is very taxing on the brain.
Yeah, tell me about
so
it.
he might be feeling a bit tired, but so far I think his play's been pretty clean.
I'd be inclined to agree with that, sure. For this series, he's definitely looked on point. That Quest Rogue game was a little bit more straightforward than some of the ones he's been involved in before. He kept running into those awkward turns where he had Zola available, he had Sonya available, he had multiple different bounce effects, and navigating the best way through all of those with the different shadow step possibilities can get very sticky at some points. But he seems to be back on track now. And yeah, speaking of back on track, that'll do.
Yeah, look at that. Mana Worm, Coin Lackey, and Secret. I feel like we've seen that an abnormal amount of times because you need to have those 3 cards plus the coin to make that happen. It's insane. And he even has the glyph follow-up for lethal.
Yeah, this is just turn 2 lethal. He doesn't even have to go all the way through the glyph chain, because he gets so many buffs straight away off that coin and the explosive runes in the first place.
Oak shaking his head, missing some Mistress or just anything to contest what is inevitably going to be a blowout from Odyssey here.
Wait and see if there's any reaction coming out of Oak when he sees this Lackey come down. There is the Secret. Just the nod. Casual little nod. He respects it. Is it so desperate that you have to rip 1 Defile now so your second Defile can kill the Mana Worm next turn? Are we there already? Yes, we are. Oh my god.
I think so. Yeah, given this hand, you don't really want to be tapping. Given that you have 3 of your AoE already, if it's a counterspell that was played, then I guess you rip 1 Defile to clear up the way for an eventual second Defile or Hellfire. And yeah, I don't think Professor Oak will have very much liberty to be tapping throughout this game. And Odyssey missed lethal there. Unfortunate. Still, though, getting 4 or 5 damage off of a 1 mana minion on turn 2 seems pretty good. And he actually has the follow-up to keep going. I mean, that explosive start from Secret Mage can fall flat if your opponent has the answer, and you don't draw into either more minions that follow up right away. Like, say, your next draws are Firelands, Portal, and Fireball, which you don't really want to be playing yet. But Odyssey has drawn into Arcane Intellect to help keep his steam going.
This is some real janky mage cards that he went through there.
Yeah.
There wasn't a great choice. Polymorph was probably a debate as to whether he wanted to deal with a Void Lord at some point. But Secret Mage doesn't really win by having to deal with a Void Lord, right?
Yeah.
You just deal damage as hard as you can for the first few turns, and then if and when the Void Lord comes down, you just switch to burning over the top. So he instead went for the Spellstone just to immediately buff the Mana Worm, get 1 more point of damage, and hopefully get some burn in hand. But he ended up with a kind of awkward Forbidden Flame on top of all of that at the end.
Yeah, if even Polymorph is not the greatest, and it's already on paper a convenient way of dealing with a Void Lord, Forbidden Flame is even more of a dead spell because it's inefficient mana to damage cost-wise, and feel like that's going to be sitting in hand as nothing but more fodder for a future Mana Worm until it comes.
This is such a weird game, the way it's developed.
Yeah.
Like, Professor Oak has kind of had to panic clear that Mana Worm. You know, when you call something a panic play, it sounds like you're criticizing it. Like, it definitely seemed justified to go for the Defile into Defile line. But that's led him down this path where he just has no cards in hand, and he's just kind of forced to 1-for-1 every minion that comes down.
Yeah, and Odyssey with the top deck of the Crystal Runner is actually really good because he didn't have a minion to keep pressuring. And as much as I was ragging on that Forbidden Flame, it seems like Professor Oak is going to go for the Faceless here. So you don't want to be discarding your Ghoul.
I was just about to say, don't be so sure you'll see the Faceless because the Doomguard does a really good job here as well. And it kind of follows up the kind of play that Professor Oak's been making, right? Where he's just dealt with every minion as it hit the board individually.
Yeah, but I don't know what Professor Oak's long-term game plan is now.
So his long-term game plan is Odyssey can draw any cards that are not Alaneth from this point.
Yeah, so
right? He's so low on resources that as long as Professor Oak can stabilize, if he stops getting minion pressure come down, and there you see exactly what I'm saying. That was the one card Professor Oak knew that he couldn't see. I think his line is fine as long as Alaneth isn't drawn. Because the one turn where a minion doesn't hit the board, then Oak can just start tapping. Eventually, he's then going to pick up his spell stones, his dark packs, he's going to heal back up, and he'll be just fine. Like, I think he played the matchup very reasonably based on the start that came down. He's just unlucky that he's staring down a turn 6 Alan.
Yeah, in that event where both players kind of run out of stuff to do, I guess you can more reliably think that you're going to be able to draw into something before the mage draws into Alaneth, because you have the tap hero power. It's just a delicate dance of how much you're willing to go down into Burn Rage. However, the risk didn't pay off for Professor Oak here, and Odyssey's got to be feeling pretty comfortable. Having seen the Gul'dan discarded means that later on there won't be the potential for repeated heal, but there's still quite a lot of heal left in the deck, especially with this super buffed Spellstone.
Wacky Rune's going to come down here. He's just going to fire off everything while he has the opportunity. Seems very reasonable. The Alaneth is going to keep on trucking here, and Professor Oak is going to have to find himself a clock onto Odyssey, because otherwise he is not getting very far.
Yeah, Alaneth just adding ammo to the Mage machine gun, and yeah, Professor Oak cannot feel comfortable about tapping. At the same time, he's really scared of counterspell to not get the heal.
Okay. I think also in the long run, he probably understands that he needs like a Mistress of Mixtures draw or something, so he can get the immediate pull off that Umbra, and maybe over a couple of turns get double dip off the Mistress for healing.
Yeah, and the 8 damage that he's putting out every turn is actually starting to pile up, because Odyssey's at 16. Like, 2 more hits from this board could mean... Oh, okay! Oh, man. Professor Oak and Odyssey both with very visible reactions here. So, there's no potential for... Is that an ice block up for the mage?
No, it's runes.
Okay, so...
3, 6, 9, 12, 50. He has 15 this turn.
Big Priest, of course, able to stack a bunch of threats, but honestly, Control Warlocks are running so much removal these days that if they parcel them out correctly and get the early Gul'dan, sometimes they just get there.
Yeah, we saw that even in the very last series, right? Like, I think each one of us has said at some point during this tournament that you can't just remove everything a Spiteful Priest plays, for example. Well, we kind of saw Control Warlock do exactly that, right? Until it came down to N'Zoth and a few hero powers from Gul'dan to finish the job. But yeah, the Control Warlock will definitely be a big problem for even this deck that we're going to see. The Hunter, normally Hunter against controlling Warlocks used to be very much in favor of the Hunters back in the day. Just too much early damage and then finish the game out with hero powers. Can't do that anymore against a Control Warlock. There's too much healing, too much stability. But this matchup is one that we talked about briefly as well. And we're thinking that maybe like Spellstone is probably one of the key cards in this matchup, just to try and really ramp up some early pressure if you can get the secrets.
Right, if you don't hit the Barns on 4, then the only other way to try and pressure the Rogue out is to get a buffed up Spellstone, and Professor Oak has at least some of the tools to get there. Odyssey looking like a decent hand with, you know, bounce effects and draw effects. So he just has to be careful to not, you know, oh my goodness, Professor Oak, the Barnes gamer.
I made the joke earlier. I'm going to repeat it. Professor Oak's Pokedex entry on 4 is not Charmander, it is Barnes. That's where it is. He hits it every single time. It's incredible. And this hand is now perfect, because we were debating, would you rather have like the Barnes Yasharaj start, at which point like Glacial Shard becomes something that can shut you down quite quickly, or would you rather have the secret into Spellstone start, which is then maybe a little bit vulnerable to Vanish? Those are like the counterplay options. Well, why not both?
Yeah, have your cake and eat it. And on top of that, I feel like the cat trick is one of the best secrets you could have, because Odyssey feels inclined to get his bounce effect / any minion that he wants to bounce, like these Fireflies, off the Igneous online as soon as possible, so he doesn't respect the cat trick. And that just means Professor Oak is getting the damage in as soon as possible, even winning the Huffer roll, because Huffer is always a win.
Very true.
So he's got all he needs, Professor Oak that is, to continue on the pressure. And we were saying that if you get Barnes and Yasharaj, one of the ways that the Quest Rogue can stifle that is to bounce. Big Priest, of course, able to stack a bunch of threats, but honestly, Control Warlocks are running so much removal these days that if they parcel them out correctly and get the early Gul'dan, sometimes they just get there.
Yeah, we saw that even in the very last series, right? Like, I think each one of us has said at some point during this tournament that you can't just remove everything a Spiteful Priest plays, for example. Well, we kind of saw Control Warlock do exactly that, right? Until it came down to N'Zoth and a few hero powers from Gul'dan to finish the job. But yeah, the Control Warlock will definitely be a big problem for even this deck that we're going to see. The Hunter, normally Hunter against controlling Warlocks used to be very much in favor of the Hunters back in the day. Just too much early damage and then finish the game out with hero powers. Can't do that anymore against a Control Warlock. There's too much healing, too much stability. But this matchup is one that we talked about briefly as well. And we're thinking that maybe like Spellstone is probably one of the key cards in this matchup, just to try and really ramp up some early pressure if you can get the secrets.
Right, if you don't hit the Barns on 4, then the only other way to try and pressure the Rogue out is to get a buffed up Spellstone, and Professor Oak has at least some of the tools to get there. Odyssey looking like a decent hand with, you know, bounce effects and draw effects. So he just has to be careful to not, you know, oh my goodness, Professor Oak, the Barnes gamer.
I made the joke earlier. I'm going to repeat it. Professor Oak's Pokedex entry on 4 is not Charmander, it is Barnes. That's where it is. He hits it every single time. It's incredible. And this hand is now perfect, because we were debating, would you rather have like the Barnes Yasharaj start, at which point like Glacial Shard becomes something that can shut you down quite quickly, or would you rather have the secret into Spellstone start, which is then maybe a little bit vulnerable to Vanish? Those are like the counterplay options. Well, why not both?
Yeah, have your cake and eat it. And on top of that, I feel like the cat trick is one of the best secrets you could have, because Odyssey feels inclined to get his bounce effect / any minion that he wants to bounce, like these Fireflies, off the Igneous online as soon as possible, so he doesn't respect the cat trick. And that just means Professor Oak is getting the damage in as soon as possible, even winning the Huffer roll, because Huffer is always a win.
Very true.
So he's got all he needs, Professor Oak that is, to continue on the pressure. And we were saying that if you get Barnes and Yasharaj, one of the ways that the Quest Rogue can stifle that is to bounce Glacial Shard. But it seems like the bounce effects won't be enough to deal with everything that'll be coming on in the next 2 turns.
Yeah, the problem from here, because Professor Oak had such an aggressive start, is he only has to connect like one or two more attacks with minions. And then the hero power race plus the Unleash the Hounds is just going to end the game, right? And now he's just drawn a kill command on top of all of that, so...
I honestly can't think of a better hand than Professor Oak could have drawn. But anyway.
I wonder if he will candle shot this Glacial Shard, though, before he chooses to go with the Barnes. Yeah, I actually like this line. We talked about this right at the start. You brought it up just again, and then Barnes coming down, and then that Glacial Shard gets bounced. That is a way Professor Oak can lose this game from a very promising-looking position. So I love this diversion, showing that he is not just a Barnes gamer. He knows when to get off that line, actually make the smart play. Really, really respect this line of thinking from Professor Oak.
Yeah, it's quite a deadly combination, right? When you draw the Barnes and you know when to hold back on it, which is not very often. This is maybe a 1 in 100 situations. It's not like holding back. The Barnes makes his win condition any different. I mean, denying the Glacial Shard, which is a prime bounce target if he played the Barnes, makes a lot of sense. So now Odyssey still on the ropes, already at 19.
So many options.
And no convenient way to complete the quest quite yet.
Yeah, he's just going to have to go off on these Flame Elementals from this point. That is 1 and 2 that have been played. That's 3 in the hand now. Then the Shadow Step is 4. The Brewmaster is 5. So he does have his completion. It is just a little bit slow from this point. And now with the Glacial Shard, Glacial Shard dealt with, Professor Oak is willing to pull the trigger and get his 10-10 in play and pretty much threaten lethal every turn from here until the end of the game now.
Right, and just getting rid of the other Flame Elemental, because it is the quest that Odyssey's shown intention to complete the quest with, the minion rather, and I expect that the Wolves will just go face here because it's leaving the Zola on the board.
Right.
That is not very consequential.
Yeah, with if you know there's a Flame Elemental in hand, previously there wouldn't, like against old Quest Rogue, there wouldn't have been much reason to trade there. Unless you were fearful of one of these 2 players, Professor Oak looking for his run back against the player that put him in the loser's bracket to begin with, Jack Attack and Odyssey trying to single-handedly crush the dreams of the hometown players, the Australia and New Zealand representatives. He has been on a tear through those players so far this tournament.
Yeah, Odyssey really rampaging through and trying to crush the dream of the Aussie Mirror in the finals. However, Professor Oak, despite being down 1-2, still has some Barnes magic that he could work with the Big Priest. And Odyssey only left with his own priest, but the Spiteful version.
Yes, and there has been a little bit of magic coming out from the Spiteful Priest this tournament as well. We've been seeing a ton of turn 1 Nausea Clerics making the deck look incredibly competitive in the early game, which often that's one of its big downfalls, right? When it comes up against like a Murloc Paladin or a Secret Mage, their 1-2-3 is so much more consistent than yours because they just play like a greater quantity of them. If you nail that Cleric, Shadow Ascendant, like whatever else curve, it's pretty tough to compete with Spiteful Priest when they have that level of late game power behind it.
Right, and we're going to see that deck come up against the Q block first. And yeah, Spiteful Priest has been making such a splash in the series aside from, I mean, in the tournament, aside from seeing a lot of turn 1 Clerics, we've been seeing a lot of Ultrasaurs.
Yeah, Ultrasaurs and Yashirajas. That's what we've been seeing. I think it was Odyssey himself who, the 3 times in a row when his Spiteful Summoner picked 10 over 8, it hit Yashiraj. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, magic going on for both of these players as Professor Oak is, of course, known to be quite a consistent Barnes gamer. So the Q block.
I love how we talk about that like it's a skill. Like it's something that you put on your resume as a Hearthstone player. Like, oh, I'm really good at Barnes.
I
like,
mean,
oh,
you'd
okay.
hire that guy if you're just
True.
looking for somebody who wins a lot.
100% true. Okay, Double Talon Priest is actually pretty solid. In the Warlock matchup, you don't necessarily want to just spew out all your small guys on 1-2-3. It's more important to like have a stable, high health board so you're resistant to like the Hellfires, the Spellstones, and the Defiles.
Right, yeah, and this hand from Odyssey is actually kind of cosplaying as a combo priest, from what I can see.
That's
and
true, actually, yeah.
Combo priest was also played in many of, maybe a handful of decks in this tournament, Spiteful Priest being the overwhelming favorite, but it really says something that 3 viable archetypes of priest have made it to a top-level tournament.
Okay, that pick, I was actually going to say I would have a long debate over because I think it's a common misconception that Duskbreaker is not good in this matchup. Because quite often, if you're not playing like a bunch of silence effects, like, you know, double Song Stealer or whatever, Duskbreaker is your best card to actually like achieve lethal opportunities because you can like bust open a 3/9, Duskbreaker all the 1/3s out of the way, and then the rest of your damage can actually get to go face. But obviously, the counter argument to that is much more simple, which is Scalebane is just a very, very good aggressive card for just ramping up pressure early on.
Right, and I think with a hand like this from Odyssey, which is not so attack heavy, the Tar Creepers are mainly defensive cards. I feel like he really needed some more aggressive push to be able to get to the point that you can bust open a Void Lord when it gets there.
Very true.
Yeah, now kind of looks like you might just want to play the Talon Priest just to get something with more attack than a Tar Creeper on the board. And then coin into some dragons, try to get the train going.
Yeah, I can see it. If you have any intention of getting through this Tar Creeper anytime soon, you need to get some kind of power into play. Like, playing your own Tar Creeper isn't going to be good enough. So yeah, the 2 options I would have debated between was the Talon Priest and the Twilight Drake. I can definitely understand the merit of either of them. But from Oak's side, yeah, this looks like a pretty straightforward tap Doomsayer play to me. Very, very difficult for Odyssey to deal with that hidden behind a Tar Creeper. See, this is hard to keep up with, Gia, how fast these guys are playing right now.
Professor Oak recognized that having seen the coin, there's no possibility for coin Song Stealer, so pretty convenient. And the Lackey off the top, gonna be quite a pain for Odyssey to deal with. Seems like an easy operative, but then you're really feeling anxious that you have no board and your opponent has a Lackey. It's kind of like impending doom. That little 2/2 has so many implications attached to it.
And now there is just so much misery in Odyssey's future. Because that is a free Void Lord on the board now. There are cubes available. There are faceless manipulators available. Anything Professor Oak wants to do, he can do this turn.
Yeah, even if a Doomguard came out, that was still pretty good. And it was more likely to get a Doomguard because 1 Void Lord's in hand. But okay, Spiteful off the top. Maybe now we're talking.
Ultrasaur or Yashiraj, as we know, those are the only 2 options available from Spiteful Summon, and never mind, I'm a liar.
I've never seen that minion before. It's not a dinosaur and it's not an old god.
Yep.
Yeah, Sea Giant. The funny thing is, you know, you'd think like, wow, playing 12 mana worth of stats on 6 mana is insane, but Turns out having double 9-cost minions by turn 6 is also insane. And yeah, Warlock does Warlock things, as we've said quite often. And now I feel like it's going to get to a point where Odyssey really wants to draw into Grand Archivist just to have convenient ways of dealing with the Void Lords. Like, trying to get a mind control on one of them might be the way, but it's so far off.
Sure. Ooh, that Umbra is going to be pretty juicy in a couple of turns. There's going to be a lot of possibilities for that if any of these Death Rattles stick around on the board. The Umbra Cube combination is so good for just generating a ton of pressure. But
it's just going to be an infinite wall, basically.
Yep.
And 1 or 2 mind control effects is not going to be enough. So looks like no matter how much pressure Odyssey is able to pile throughout the turns, just the endless barrage of Void Lords can connect to face, honestly, because Professor Oak knows that there's only limited silence effects for Odyssey, and like Odyssey is just gonna get walled out of the game.
Does he play? How many Song Stealers does he play, if any, in his list?
I believe it's just 100%
one. Sure. Because I think Ender was running double copy, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Odyssey's playing 1. So you did have the there was a play there where you could like value trade everything into the Sea Giant. You could have gone, 3/3 and the Mistress of Mixtures into the Sea Giant, and then cubed one of your own Void Lords to try and get like an insane amount of value out of it. Which obviously is vulnerable to that 1 copy of Silence, but it's way before a Mind Control can come down. It's before even Archivist into Mind Control can come down. So I think that was definitely a play that was worth thinking about, just to deal with the biggest threat on the board.
Yeah, and it seems like this was the turn that Odyssey had the window for a Song Stealer that would still be pretty relevant. Now that one of the Void Lords is gone, it's possible that he's actually able to clear the other one next turn before some Cube shenanigans can come down, unless Professor Oak draws into a pact, because Cube and Umbra is not yet live.
Right.
And then because the deck of Odyssey has the potential to draw into Dustbreaker, we could get to that situation we were talking about a while ago where you've busted through the daddies, now you need the Dustbreaker to deal with the little children.
File is drawn and the entire room goes silent, attempting to work out if there is a good Defile play.
I mean, I'm going to take a decent Hellfire as well.
Yeah.
I think the turn starts with tap. Yeah, so for Hellfire, it's a little bit awkward because you'd love to not put any minion damage on your Void Lord, but it's fine. He can. It'll still survive the trade with the Kobold plus Hellfire. Cobalt, not Kobold. Yeah.
So many possibilities.
And could even preemptively Umbra after the Hellfire.
The Defile's also quite awkward. I've basically been staring at nothing but that the whole time. So you can trade 2 into the 4/3 and then play a Mistress. That gets you 1, 2, 3, but then there's no 4 to bridge to the other 2 5-health minions that you need to kill. So Defile is kind of equally awkward at this point as well. There you go, he's found it. Yeah, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just he has to throw away. So he has to throw away the health on his Void Lord as well, which is I was searching for a play where you didn't have to do that, so you retained your Void Lord body afterwards.
I really don't know why it was an Hellfire over that, to be honest. I guess this allows him to fit in both tap and Tar Creeper, but I would have liked to have a Void Lord on board next turn, so you have the Cube and Umbra.
Yeah, I can see that. There is the argument, the like Hellfire is always Hellfire, whereas Defile is like a situational card, so I can definitely see it from that perspective. But I also, that's why I spent so long like looking for the play that preserved the Void Lord. I really did want that body on board. But then if you look at it from this perspective, like he can just reset with a new Void Lord on this turn, right? If he really wanted to, and just start the whole thing over again. So maybe the play's fine.
Yeah, it's still that window where Mind Control just as a card and not an Archivist pull is still not yet online.
Right.
And even if the Void Lord gets silenced, it can still be cubed and Umbra'd back to better than new even. New and doubled. Yeah, the problem persists for Odyssey, just trying to get through wall after wall. He didn't have a Duskbreaker to get through these small minions. He has a Hellfire of his own, but it seems premature because the Void Lord would still survive.
No real debate. That was a Glimmer Root, so he just takes the card in the open deck list format, his Mortal Coil. The only ever debate about the Glimmer Root in an open deck list format is whether, like, sometimes the card is so bad that you just rather not have it in your hands, like cluttering up space for you to draw other cards. But
hasn't been a thing since Raza Priest, really.
Pretty much, yeah. I think maybe if people were playing against Ghost Asa, they might consider keeping cards out of their hand against the 6 Cold Light Oracle 2 Naturalize lineup.
Right, so Umbra Cube is available if he wants it. He'd have to clear up some board space to get the full value out of that. Alternative plays. Hellfire does a decent job of clearing stuff up. Well, I guess it's just a cleric, yeah.
The scary part here is that if he commits too far down the Void Lord line, I guess if you want to describe it that way, is that he goes to the super late game against Spiteful Priest that way, right? He's not getting a 4 or 5 Doomguard burst kill at any point once he commits several cubes and Umbra into the Void Lord package. It also will then mean that his Gul'dan doesn't bring back a bunch of Doomguards because there's just so many Voidwalkers and Voidlords in the pool. So then it becomes a value fight, right, against Spiteful Priest, which is amazingly, despite being quite aggressive overall, still one of the best value decks in the entire game. If they, like, operative your Gul'dan or your N'Zoth, and then they mind control a Voidlord from you, like, they can actually go very easily against you in the value game in terms of just breeding Voidlords over and over. So I do actually like this, just getting a Doomguard in play and trying to switch your game plan to going off on that Doomguard plan instead.
I think that's exactly what Professor Oak was debating about for so long, and he found not the cleanest clear, but some way to preserve the 2 demons on board. Well, of course, getting the Obsidian roll on the smaller minion, pretty lucky. And still clearing up most of the board for Odyssey here. So now Odyssey might have found the window to try and mount his own board pressure, while the wall option has essentially, the window for that is closed for Professor Oak.
Right. Does lose the Doomguard to Mind Control, though, as you've mentioned so many times already this game. Mind Control is just such a backbreaker. It's just always in the back of your mind with every play that you make, because Control Warlock or Q-Block, they're just decks built around making incredibly powerful individual minions, and then suddenly Mind Control is just an absolute blowout against you.
Yeah, and suddenly Professor Oak his hand is scarce on resources. Defile plus Hellfire combined can deal with some of the chunkier minions from the Priest, but yeah, without the Skull in hand to activate the Doomguard plus Cube shenanigans, now it seems like Professor Oak's being the reactor.
Yeah, he needs Skull, right? Like, that's going to be the big break point from here. If he can get a Skull and pull out that Doomguard without discarding the cubes and the Umbra, then suddenly he's right back in business, because he can do enormous amounts of burst damage in one turn from that point.
And this turn is incredibly awkward because, well, he's supposed to not only be answering his opponent's minions, but making things awkward for the next board. But because he's out of resources, it seems like the next board for Odyssey is going to be really backbreaking. Of course, Professor Oak does have the Twisting Net. Oh, actually, there's none in this list. Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
Wow, he just plays a 4/6, essentially for the sake of having a 4/6. It has some 2/1s inside it, but they're not really relevant information at this point. Just wants to be able to compete with the board state a little bit, buy some more time to get him towards the Skull, the N'Zoth, the Blood Reaver Gul'dan, all of those kind of things that he needs to really set up a win condition for himself.
So with Defile and Hellfire...
Never mind.
Yeah, okay, that makes our lives a bit easier. There's quite a few Void Lords that have bitten the dust throughout the game.
There's a worrying amount of Void Walkers, though, as well.
Yeah.
If he maxes out on just on Void Walkers here and doesn't get a Void Lord, he's dead.
And he pointed the cube face, so I'm thinking he feels pretty confident about...
Yep, seems good.
2 is enough. And I know Odyssey has been saving the Hellfire for this situation, in which maybe only 1 or no Void Lords would appear, which is unlikely, but in that case, Hellfire would create a very easy path through the taunts, leading to lethal. But he's got the silence for this, meaning that Yeah, okay, I didn't see that all of these cards had been drawn already. This game is moving really fast, so... That is just... Yeah, Professor Oak's still on the ropes here. Okay, now this has to be some sort of Defile and Hellfire turn. Yeah, Hellfire seems pretty clean.
He can get back on the Void Lord train, go back to being defensive. He could just Umbra Cube his Void Lord that's in play right now if he really wanted to.
Yeah, and then between the cube and the hero power.
Hunger grows.
Sorry, I was looking at Cube Pact. Umbra Cube, yeah, seems good as well. He can take the value trade on the Dustbreaker as well.
Yep.
Or the 5/2.
Yeah, the 5/2 even now.
Well, it kind of works either way because you're trading the cube into one of the other one.
That's true.
One
yeah,
or the other.
It doesn't make a great deal of difference, right?
Grows.
You also miss a hero power with that play, whereas you do get to hero power if you go cube packed instead, so you actually get, you know, a ton more burst healing out that way.
But I do like the Umbra because that's your last cube. And having seen the silence effect come out, don't think you're too afraid of just 1/9/6 when you have more Void Lords blocking the way. Looks like he's gonna go for Hellfire though. And setting up the preemptive Umbra.
Whoa.
It's gonna get punished by the Hellfire in hand for Odyssey. Not that Professor Oak had any way of knowing that the discovered card was Hellfire.
Right. He's seen the Dustbreakers at this point, so that's kind of what he's accounting for.
Odyssey is actually at an alarmingly low health total, although the Hellfire plus his heal to his face and putting a taunt on board would prevent him from dying, from what you can see.
Yeah, he has to be fearful of Doom Guards coming out from hand, though, and he knows there's the hero power equipped as well. It's been a roller coaster of a game. Both players have looked a long way ahead at different points throughout proceedings. It looks like Professor Oak might have turned the final corner here, because Odyssey is now just being forced to play so defensively every turn because of his low health total.
And going for this, Professor Oak's 1-off from what I can see.
Yep, takes all of his damage just to get through the taunt, so the only thing that's relevant is just the hero power to face right now.
Slightly awkward, honestly.
Well, I mean, if he plays Doomguard and doesn't discard the cube,
yeah,
then he's in business.
And it's more likely to not discard the cube than it is to discard the cube, but I feel like he's in a position where he can just stall out a bit.
Oh, no, he has it. Yeah, this is guaranteed.
Oh,
he
yeah,
finds it with the
Defile.
Cobalt Defile. Yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah.
And then Doomguard can just connect
Very
face. Found the
clean.
guaranteed lethal. Much, much better than we are. Slams face with the Doomguard. Professor Oak will be very pleased that he spotted that one. Picks up the guaranteed win with that Doomguard. And again, I think it was a pretty impressive game from him. I think he visibly diverted game plans on a number of occasions. Started off very defensively with the Void Lords, switched very quickly to trying to get a Doomguard into play and then, you know, breed that with the cubes. And then towards the end, just really went for like all-out aggression and setting up a lethal with that Hellfire play towards the end. While we were kind of looking at like what cube plays were available, he just realized that like killing the opponent was actually a much cleaner win condition for him. Yeah,
I think it shows some really great matchup understanding from Professor Oak, being able to divert from one game plan to another. A lot of the times, casters can rag on players for saying, all right, you made one play, you should stick with that line, because oftentimes diverting midway through can reduce your percentage to win. But sometimes if you spot the exact way to be flex in the situation, then it can get you through. And it's been raining pretty hard suddenly.
I was going to say, I don't know how much of this is being picked up by our microphones, but the heavens have opened above us. It is absolutely hammering down with rain on our studio. We just need some dramatic thunder and lightning effects to fully round out the epic feel of this losers finals going on right now, HCT Sydney.
And it will be a priest mirror, but one is big and one is spiteful.
And I don't know what was going on. I was promised an Australian summer when I came out here, and I've ended up with a British winter. Like, what the hell?
You really can't escape home no matter where you go, Sato.
I just brought the rain with me. I'm sure there's a metaphor in there somewhere about me just spreading misery everywhere I go, right?
It's appreciated, a little bit of snarkiness. Right, so Odyssey has the Spiteful in hand, which is pretty good. I assume you keep that in this matchup. And Professor Oak, no Barnes quite yet, but I never underestimate this guy's mulligans.
Definitely deep in the tank. Shadow Essence with the coin is conventionally a keep in most matchups.
Yep.
It's not like Spiteful Priest is going to murder you before you get to turn 6. They might be able to generate a ball, but they don't really have the burst damage to back it up and really punish you for being a little bit slow. So Shadow Essence is probably a good enough starting point to consider holding on to. Professor Oak certainly does so, and let's see. No, not just yet.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about Psychic Scream there. I don't think you go so far as to keep it, but it's just one of the most convenient ways to deal with the Spiteful Summoner board.
Yeah, I think it kind of clashes with the Shadow Essence as well, right?
Sure,
Because
yeah.
if you're planning to coin the Shadow Essence, then suddenly your Psychic Scream is really slow once you've used the coin.
Yeah, and also just the bevy of other removal options from the Big Priest means that you're bound to draw into one of those, so it's better to toss away one of those many options to get your one of Barnes. So the curve is going to start off a little bit late, but still strong for Odyssey here. Yeah, he's got 3, 4, 5. Dragon Board's resilient to Dragonfire Potions, of course. We don't see it in hand yet for Professor Oak. Okay, that means he has one set of AoE available already. I imagine he's just going to paint, yeah. Really straightforward with the curving out here. Skulking Geist can remove pint-sized potions.
That's true. That is very true indeed, but not, yeah, as you mentioned, not a great deal going on from Odyssey's side of the board right now. He's kind of just playing the green cards, which, you know, is sometimes the way with these very mid-rangey type of decks. Professor Oak does whiff on the Barnes when he needed it the most, so it's going to be the turn 5 coin Shadow Essence, and this is always the fear with Big Priest. When you are starting to go off with that Shadow Essence, there is the built-in failure rate where Barnes can be more of a party ruiner than just refusing to show up in your hand, but can actually just pop out of that Shadow Essence, and suddenly none of your hand works anymore whatsoever.
On the other hand, it could bring out Yasharaj, it could bring out an even bigger friend, and he could really get the train started. So I think, well, do you like any of the removal options here? I feel like you need to start mounting your own pressure.
So there is merit to Pint-Size Horror this turn, because you know that next turn Odyssey can drop Geist, and then suddenly Pint-Size Horror just isn't an availability to you anymore.
Yeah.
You're gonna have no Pint-Size Potion, and you're gonna have a dead Shadow Word Horror in your hand, right?
There's because little to no minions that have less than 3 attack for the Spiteful Priest.
So honestly, it's, I mean, enormous amount of respect for this play being made, because what I was about to say is in situations like this, I always want to just go in blind, right? I want to be playing this game, not be able to see Odyssey's hand, and actually genuinely see what play I would make. Because I think this play is correct, but am I just calling it correct because I can see the Geist, right? That's the debate that you have to come out with.
That is just about the best result you can get from a Spiteful Summoner, and although the Shadow Word Death is available for Professor Oak, knowing that so many dragons are in the deck kind of makes it
Dream? No.
Not quite good enough. Jeez, another Spiteful as well.
Oh boy.
Alright, so in Odyssey's mind, he has to be worrying about Psychic Scream. Don't think Professor Oak runs the Shadow Reaper Anduin. He does not, so it would only be Psychic Scream as the way of clearing a board this big. And even if you see that come out, you have a decent follow-up with Scalebane and Talon Priest, so it looks like, yeah, Odyssey just went in there. And he's gonna make it all the way.
This isn't actually too bad, because Oak has the Embrace the Shadows Circle of Healing to follow this up.
Alright, and the hero power can fit in as well, so Ysera... Oh no, it still has to go in.
Ysera goes into the 7/7, you hero power the 5/5, and it's a full clear still. It's actually pretty fantastic at this point, because Deathwing Dragonlord can actually be a downside in weird situations like this, because one of the things we talked about for the whole tournament is how well Spiteful Priest can partition its threats, right? Just choose to only play 1 or 2 cards at a time. Well, Deathwing Dragonlord forces you to overcommit, and just with the usage of an Embrace Circle combo, Professor Oak has just cleaned up a huge amount of Odyssey's best minions.
Yeah, Embrace Circle is an incredible amount of damage for the amount of mana it costs.
Right.
Of course, Embrace included in the deck because you can't put Auchenai in Big Priest. And yeah, I really like the point you made about the Dragonlord being a detriment there. It now means that the Operative has no dragon to combo off of, and now Professor Oak may have turned the corner, but he's still at a very, very delicate health total without the Greater Potion, Healing Potion in hand to stabilize just yet.
You are the Shadow's puppet.
Okay. 5/5 Shadow Ascent. I'd play that card.
And Odyssey knows where the damage is going. But again, big Spiteful Priest doesn't run any burst, just minion pressure. Guess he's looking to draw Mind Control or Archivist into Mind Control to deal with these Ysera's.
Meanwhile, Professor Oak's equation is quite simple, and that is just to not die. So I imagine the Geist is being dreamed this turn as a starting point.
Yes. And then the Shadow Ascendant is being killed off. That means the Talon Priest will still be able to connect. And if Odyssey can keep up with the board to a point that that Professor Oak can't trade off more than 1 minion at a time, then he maybe just gets there. But because Professor Oak can play the double Emerald Drake, seems like the minion damage is just a dream for now.
This is I was about to say I expect he won't Circle of Healing here, because the board state he had to begin with, 4/7, 4/7, 7/6, 7/6, was perfectly resistant to Mind Control in every way, right?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter what happens. Whereas now, Mind Controlling in Ysera actually creates kind of a weird board state on the opposing side.
It's funny how that works out. Still no dragon picked up, so the Operative sitting kind of dead in hand. I imagine the Twilight Acolyte will come in just to stifle some pressure, because that's already 22 damage staring at him. And with a Nightmare, double Nightmare, or not that he can play Ysera Awakens, but there's some lethal potential from what Odyssey can see.
He could play Awakens. He just heal face first and then play it afterwards.
Sure.
Those 1-mana spells are well and truly destroyed at this point.
Right, so I guess the game plan for Professor Oak here is, yeah, okay, my opponent doesn't have burst, just keep clearing. Eventually the board will be completely mine. And we just get there because Ysera is great. Ysera ×2 is insane.
Yeah, so this turn he has a complete board clear. He can get himself back up to 6 again. He just puts the Geist right back where it came from yet again. It is hard to imagine a world where Odyssey gets back onto this board right now, and this is the huge exploitable weakness of Spiteful Priest, is that you never have to be scared of dying. If you can count the damage on board and it is less than your total health, you are alive. It is that simple with this deck.
I'm really trying to rack my brains for any outs Odyssey has. Would have to be the Free Remember and to charge Devil Soar here.
Yep. Yeah, I can see it.
Anything else?
Once upon a time.
Deathwing, he's probably dead next turn though, right?
He is 4, 8, 12, 19. There's only 21 in play right now.
Okay. Deathwing into Dream Deathwing. Sap Deathwing.
But yeah, any damage Ysera card would kill him this turn, whether he heals face or not, because Nightmare and Ysera Awakens both add 5. A total 26, but Professor Oak has just hit minions and dreams. That is all he's hit off it. 3 total Yseras now.
Given that Dream is a possibility, I guess it makes more sense to heal face than play the Tar Creeper. I mean, he stays alive by the skin of his teeth.
I don't think the hill face ever actually matters. Like, what does 3 that doesn't do 5
That's true.
in this position?
An insane game. We could be seeing Deathwing pull its weight. Have any taunt minions died yet? No statues, right? So
Nope,
once the Deathwing comes down, Professor Oak actually doesn't have an answer for it outside of Dream.
Right.
But then he can just go Dream and then play 3 minions along with it. So yeah, but then the Deathwing clears those minions.
Also, yes.
Yeah.
He's about to get 3 more Sarah cards at the end of this turn, though, so, you know.
Yeah, a lot can happen. It's very much dependent on what those Ysera cards are. Or you can take 4
Sorry,
Ysera
I
cards.
stand corrected. He actually doesn't even have room for 4 more Sarah cards. You pull one back, right? Do you've even got to think about playing around Deathwing at this point, right? Your board state's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
That he's just taken another spike card. I'm surprised at this play being made here from Oak. It's just Dreams and Minions!
Oh
That's
my
all he can get!
goodness. No Awakens.
It's so absurd.
And now... well, we're slamming the Deathwing every day. There's nothing else. I actually don't see where this is going. Well, Professor Oak has 2 turns to stall with Dream to draw into Shadow Word Death. Suppose. And he is milling a card this turn, though.
And that's a taunt that got milled as well, which is of huge importance. Professor Oak nods. I'm not sure if that was a nod of, oh damn, I messed up, I forgot Deathwing was a possibility, or a nod that he had a plan and was expecting this. Really could go either way, but I reiterate what I said the previous turn. I'm really surprised at the line he took. And this time, like, it's not a caster vision thing that we can see Deathwing was there. It's a, I am so far ahead in this game right now, how do I possibly lose? The answer is Deathwing. So why commit that hard into a board that Deathwing can punish?
I guess it was just a lapse of memory that Deathwing is a card and a possibility off of Historian. And you see Professor Oak visibly looking stressed in his chair. Still think he's in... okay, I'm not sure how many cards are left in deck, but basically waiting until he can draw Shadow Word Death.
So I think you're supposed to play 1 Emerald Drake here? Basically, you want a minion that contests any 1 card your opponent draws,
yes,
right? Because that means that they have to, like, at some point Deathwing you. If you play something that's too weak, they can just play the card that they top deck.
Yeah.
But, like, you need to get them to commit their Deathwing into the minimum amount that you're playing from your hand, right?
Yeah.
And all the time... Sorry, this is very silly.
It
But
is.
every turn that goes
Stop
past
that.
where they don't play Deathwing is actually in your favor, because it's an extra turn for you to draw a Taunt minion or Shadow Word Death, and like any of those things lock out the game at that point, right?
Okay, so a taunt draw, like an Obsidian statue, would have been an out for Professor Oak there as well. And I'm thinking, is there still a Barnes remaining in the deck? If it's only taunt minions, then Yashiraj is viable there.
There is a Barn still in the deck.
Yeah, so that's why Professor Oak is deciding to Dream once again, but the problem repeats itself and he's only running out of minions as Deathwing fodder.
He's about to go up to 14 on the next turn, though, when Deathwing comes down again, which
Yes.
means he will be resistant to lethal.
From 1 attack.
Yes.
What a crazy, crazy last few turns.
Yeah, this is actually probably going to still work out fine for Oak, because
Yeah.
when the Deathwing comes down and he can't deal with it anymore, he can just go Yashiraj and just put enough stats in play that he can kill the 12-12 the next turn anyway. So the 12-12 hits face, he goes down to 2, he then kills the 12-12 with his Yashiraj or whatever else, hopefully an Obsidian statue, ideally, and then that'll lock out the game.
So Odyssey... well, that gets... yeah.
That's the worst draw in the deck to discard there, that
Yeah.
mind control.
Okay, Deathwing finally dealt with, unless it's the card off the top. But Odyssey can still draw. Did he discard Grand Archivist? I'm pretty sure he
did.
at
He
least
did.
has 1 free from Amber left.
He discarded Grand Archivist.
Yeah.
What a game to end this series.
Yeah.
Absolute
I am speechless.
insanity.
So Professor Oaks is thinking about the Deathwing again.
Yeah, I like this. He's thinking about Deathwing. He's also thinking about Mind Control #2, which I believe is still in the deck, right? One got discarded. The other one hasn't been played yet,
Yeah, I
if
think
I'm
so.
correct. So this play is better against both of those options.
Okay.
It's only a little bit weaker.
Deathwing without the battle cry. What's going on?
It's a little bit weaker to Free from Amber. That was the only threat at that point.
Yeah,
But still
Professor
like
Oak's
the
still
play.
fine. Just the statue here gets him out of the woods. Even Yashiraj, even if it pulls the Barnes, Deathwing isn't enough to get there, and then he just puts enough damage on board to make it lethal in the backswing. So despite all the Deathwing drama...
There it is. That's not how that's supposed to work, buddy. That's supposed to go the other way around, but I think it might still just be good enough to get Professor Oak over the line. Wow.
Yeah, you're talking about the rain and the thunder, signaling some kind of glorious match, and I think we got it. Can't complain.
This really did feel just like the conclusion of an anime, right? They're in a wheat field somewhere. It's pitch black, hammering down with rain. Lightning bolts fork through the sky as both players just throw the most powerful things they have at each other.
Hold up.
Turn.
That's a mind control.
Oh my god, that is a mind control.
Hold up. Okay. So Oak is thinking about, again, the mind control and the original Deathwing that's still in the deck.
Yes.
So, if he plays Ysera, trades, mind control isn't enough to deal with everything because the Deathwing would have to trade 1 minion, but the Barn still survives.
I like this play. Yeah, Shadow
Okay,
you can just go face, right? You don't even have to respect the Deathwing at this point.
Yeah,
just heal up to full.
makes a lot more sense.
Go face. If there is a mind control on your 7/6, then the Obsidian statue comes down, and that is checkmate because the Deathwing Obsidian statue interaction works out in your favor anyway. So you have dealt with absolutely everything that the opponent can throw at you.
Yeah.
Stop putting Deathwings in your opponent's deck, Oak.
I think he's thinking about whether there's still a silence remaining in the deck.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you might be right.
I must consider.
There isn't. Although I wouldn't blame Professor Oak for having a little too much on his mind. For all the times this game has gone back and forth, it's easy to forget that one mind control has been milled by the Deathwing, and oh my gosh, what is happening?
Dragon Hatcher! Oh my god, the Dragon Hatcher! There's 2 Deathwings in there! There are 2 Deathwings in that deck!
Oh.
This is just getting ridiculous.
It's nuts.
Wait, the Dragon Hatcher itself isn't a dragon, right?
It's not.
So why wouldn't you Dragonfire Potion that turn? That just seems wrong.
Unsure. What is going on?
There it is.
And he's now lost the Obsidian statue, so Ysera, on the turn it comes down, is powerless to stop the onslaught of damage. And hold on, he was playing that Dragonfire as a snap pick, but was it Ysera there to try and get the Awakens because he wasn't dead on board just yet? And now the Ysera coming down a bit late.
Oh no, is it possible? Can Professor Oak have actually found a way to lose this series?
Oh my goodness. Laughing Sister, definitely not what he wants to see there. Both players on very thin decks, but this Deathwing, like the 4th one we've seen throughout the entire game, through one source or another. What minions are there even left? The other statue?
Is there another statue?
Yeah.
Apparently there is, yeah, okay.
Okay, so that's one way for Odyssey to deal with it, but he has the Historian as fodder, so wherever the statue Death Rattle lands could be a huge, huge deal. And he even picks up a dragon to activate. I'm speechless.
Oh my. He's just got nothing left. There's another statue coming down, but he's going to fatigue himself out at this point. The Psychic Screams have put him behind in fatigue even.
Yeah, Professor Oak knows it. Just shaking in his chair. And Odyssey looking like he's bored in class, honestly. Odyssey's done it. And honestly, I'm not sure whether we can credit that to Odyssey's play rather than Professor Oak's kind of rushed plays at the end.
I think there were several mistakes towards the end there from Professor Oak. I think he played it very nicely up until the point where Deathwing came involved. I think he overcommitted into the initial Deathwing.
Yeah.
I think from that point, there was the turn where he Psychic Screamed, where I think he just can slam Obsidian Statue and the game is locked up. And then the really perhaps unforgivable play, I think, is just not Dragonfire posturing that Dragon Hatcher as soon as it came down, which is why that Deathwing that killed him was on the board